So I'm going to kick it off with Whitney to talk a little bit about your role within NavalX, and if you want to give a brief description. And then after, I'll call you all out, and then then I have some questions for you, and we'll have kind of a lively discussion with your overviews in each of your roles. It'd be great.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Tuni, and thanks for setting this up and bearing with me as I get in. So NavalX was set up just about a year ago by the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Hondo Gertz. He's in charge of research, development, and acquisitions. So all stuff that's pretty relevant to a lot of you guys. I see a lot of familiar faces. So I think a lot of you know that the defense industry does have a pretty prominent spot in Rhode Island and in our Northeast area. But one of the things we've discovered over time is that while we have pockets of innovation and while we have a lot of really good, talented people in industry and academia supporting us, we as in the government don't traditionally have easy ways for people to access what we're doing and to learn about what opportunities there are, especially for startups and companies that have never worked with us before. So the tech bridges were actually set up to do two things. One is be kind of these hubs out in a safe space, but not a guarded, walled space, to really talk about industry and defense challenges and to focus on dual use opportunities to collaborate. And then also for learning and sharing across our Department of Navy level ecosystems, how can we be working better together? How can we transition technology solutions faster for our needs, but also alongside other industry needs as well, so that we can harvest all the talent in our local and regional ecosystems. So I've been working on this project for about a year now, this initiative, and we've taken a lot of lessons learned from the Office of Naval Research. Some of you know Rich Carlin. He stood up some business growth accelerators, some STEM programs, a lot of university programs, and also supports NUWC Newport and some other groups on projects. So luckily we have a lot of really experienced people in our group, and we're constantly looking for people who've done things better elsewhere to kind of build their methodologies into our practices. I think that's enough for now. Thank you.
I'll take myself off mute there. Steve, you've been at NUWC, for those of you who don't know, which most people here do, it's the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Division Newport. You've been there since 1991?
Yep, a long time.
Wow, so Steve is the chief scientist at NUWC, and why don't you give everyone an overview of NUWC and your role in this?
Okay, yeah, so I've been at NUWC for a long time, but this type of role, which I've just been in for a few months, is very different than what I've done in the past. I've been on the research side of things, mainly inward facing. So, being out in the real world and talking to people hasn't been part of my job description for most of the time. Yeah. So it's been an interesting experience. But one of the things that I see from the inside working at NUWC is we have a lot of projects, funded from ONR or from NUWC, different program sponsors, and we do work with industry. But when we do, it's not an easy thing to do. I know from the outside looking in, companies see working with the government as sometimes difficult. Well, even from the inside looking out, sometimes that's difficult. And I think if we were able to do that more easily, it'd be easier for our engineers to reach out and collaborate and start working some of these projects that are smaller, where right now it's not worth the effort to get a contract set up unless it's a bigger project. So with that background, when I jumped into the tech bridge role, I could definitely see the need for that. And then as we've been talking to various companies, we've been trying to see, what do we really need from an infrastructure standpoint for the tech bridge, both physically and virtually. I'll let Christian talk about the physical site. Where, as Whitney said, when you go to NUWC or most of our establishments, you see a guard, a gun, and a gate. It's not very welcoming. So having a place that's welcoming, I think, is a big part of the strategy. But also on the kind of the virtual side, we want to be able to support a company no matter where they are in the evolution. I'm not going to show slides, but I have this slide that is kind of the evolution chart where on the left side, you have the baby, and on the right side, you have a graduate, where a company could come in early stage. We can plug them into a program until they're a large enough company or an experienced enough company to work with business the more traditional ways. So, on the kind of left side of that evolution, we've been working with Mass Challenge RI. We hope to keep that going as kind of the accelerator and the kickoff part of the program. Another thing that we're doing now is the Navy can do prize challenges. We did one last year with the help of Polaris and the Composites Alliance, and Whitney was very much involved with that. But we want to continue that. We have some more prize challenges coming up this year. So that's just another different way to work with industries. We've reestablished a broad agency announcement. So any company, if they have an idea and they're working with somebody in the Navy and they say, geez, they could really use this, you can apply to that. And depending on if there's a need for it, it's an easier way to enter into working with the Navy. And then for the last couple of years, there's been the OTA, the other transactional authorities. This is a program with that's run by UTIC, the Undersea Technology Group, and that's a way to get a prototype done very quickly. And so some of these are new programs, but the other thing we want to do is have support for existing programs, the STTR and SBIR programs. And these programs have been around for a while. NUWC has some support. The primes in the area have supported that program. But we want to do a better job being kind of a connector of all these programs and try to get everyone working together to help with these companies. I envision it that a company comes in with a good idea, and they say, hey, I got this good idea, but I have no idea how to work with the government. We press the appropriate easy button, and maybe it's a university connection that they need to do research, or we press the prime button, and a group of primes come up and say, well, this is how we can work with you to get your technology into an SBIR. So that's what we're trying to do, and make it easier for everyone to work with us.
So
Interject one thing, Tuni.
Yeah.
Steve mentioned the connector concept, and the tech bridge, the Northeast Tech Bridge that rolled out of NavalX is the concept of being a super connector. And I'd like to just toot Steve's horn a moment, because, he mentioned that he's been involved since 1991, or you did, Tuni. And at first you say, well, gee, he's a chief scientist. He is very well respected. He's a very smart guy. And I don't say that loosely or lightly. And you'd think, well, why would ever they take him out of that mainstream? Well, they haven't quite taken him out of any mainstream, as he knows from his being dual and triple hatted. But Steve, in his years of doing very serious engineering work, absolutely understands what are the challenges in the Navy and what are the challenges coming down from DOD. Across those opportunities, there are opportunities for solution spaces, opportunities to work together collaboratively and actually solve something that is really meaningful in our ecosystem. Second, he knows who's who in the Navy. So you go to some people that are relatively new in their career, or they've had a very narrow responsibility, and they know who's around them. Steve knows the who's who across this defense ecosystem. So when somebody comes and says, gee, I have a certain technology, do you know of folks within your system, DOD, that are interested in it? He is able to connect them, and he connects them with credibility, because Steve also comes not just being smart and connected, but he's courageous and bold, as others around him will tell you. And that's not a light or an easy virtue to find, I guess, within the DOD environment. So in our world, Steve, as Tech Bridge Director, actually brings a real lot to the table.
I'm glad
I really appreciate that. Yeah, and the Navy can be pretty risk averse. I try not to be. I always tell people I have a letter of reprimand that I'll draft for myself, so when I get into trouble, I'll save them some time. But and it is, there are some things we can't do as government employees, which makes things a little bit tough to navigate sometimes. That's why it's so important to have Lee and Christian and Susan and on the industry side, helping out. The other thing I just wanted to mention, just in terms of when you talk about a small company or who you can help, if you look at, actually I see Jim on the line, a small company can be helped by the Mass Challenge program, and it could be and when we talk about helping, we want to talk about dual use technology. Sometimes it'll be a company that's already familiar with the SBIR process, but needs help on the commercialization side. On the UTIC, the OTAs, there's 270 companies involved there, and about 75% of them are non-traditionals. And so there's been about over 25 projects over the last couple of years, and over $250 million have gone out through that. So that's an important program. And I think one of the questions was how small is too small. One of the recent SBIR awards went to a one-person company up in Boston. So just one employee, but they're in the program, and their technology, once they go through that program, that'll give them rights across the government on that IP. So the SBIR program, something to consider as a small business. You have the money from the program itself, but getting that SBIR award, it's almost like it's similar to getting a patent, where you now are in that program, and that your technology is the go-to technology now throughout the Navy, throughout the DoD.
Thank you for explaining that. And I just want to remind anyone that's watching, some of us understand these acronyms and these words that, and I'm a civilian, but I've been hanging around with a lot of you for a couple of years now. So I'm even, I'm not noticing as much some of these words that like non-traditionals and you talk about prize challenges and non-traditionals and SBIR. There might be people here that don't understand that. So please use the chat if there's something that you want us to define more clearly. I love that you interjected, Lee, because you really explained, like, Steve's actually a bridge, which I think is you're the perfect bridge for this, and you've got a lot of different lanes going on here. But as the afternoon rolls out, we're gonna peel back the layers of the onion on some of these. I'll start with you, Christian. Why don't you explain, as the director of Polaris MEP and you're considered a senior executive but I think you're the executive director of Polaris MEP, correct? And then explain a little bit, take it from where Steve left off with 401 Tech Bridge, and kind of give an overview of what that's going to look like.
Sure. Thanks, Tuni. It is good to see you again. Good to see everybody again. So Polaris MEP, very quickly, for those of you that don't know, is a nonprofit. The MEP Center aspect stands for Manufacturing Extension Partnership. It's a federal program, so there's one MEP center in every state, and we're all charged with the same thing, sustainability and growth of small and medium manufacturers. The way we do that is we're essentially manufacturing consultants. So Polaris has a team of consultants. As I used to say in the olden days, the best days are when I go into the office and there's nobody there, because they're all deployed out in manufacturing companies. That means a whole nother thing these days. But what that means is we have staff that's deployed every day in small manufacturers, which means we know what they're good at, we know what they're bad at, we know their struggles, we know their needs. So we're really embedded in those small manufacturers across the state. And all of the MEP centers and I have been, well, we always look to help support those companies with top line growth programs. How do we give them new products, new markets, technology, and in those discussions, in a technology point of view, we really started looking at the composite industry, and textiles has been here for a long time. So in those conversations about how to support better, I met Whitney and a few other O&R people, and then those conversations started getting bigger and broader. And one of the interesting aspects of 401 Tech Bridge, that concept as it grew, is the engagement with small companies, engagement with the partnership arena. So it's really a key aspect for 401 Tech Bridge, which is engaging those non-traditional small manufacturing companies, which may not, and when I say non-traditional, I heard you, Tuni. What non-traditional means is companies that have not traditionally engaged with SBIRs or any kinds of Navy defense programs in the past. And again, we are embedded in all those small companies day to day. So Steve mentioned prize challenges. Luckily for us in the state, Whitney and the Office of Naval Research was able to sponsor a prize challenge last year where Polaris and the Composite Alliance that Susan runs was able to engage with a bunch of companies and have them apply for it, and companies that really would not have traditionally applied for those things in the past. So in this concept of, how do we engage industry better, small industry that really hasn't done that in the past with the Department of Defense, there is a physical aspect that Steve talked about. Again, the past 3 months have changed, but it doesn't change the need long term, where there is a need to have government, the Navy, small industry, and academia all work together on projects to solve technical issues. The Navy and the government is trying lots of different ways to turn technology faster, and these tech bridges is one of them. And one aspect is the ability to get everybody together in the same space, which is potentially harder to do in other locations and more secure locations. So we are building out a space on Aquidneck Island where we're going to be able to have technical work being done by the Navy alongside with industry and bring students in. And we really think that collision with all of that will help speed up the technology commercialization. And the smaller companies, and I do see Chase Hogaboom on the phone with Gertz is a great example of a small composite company, which is very dynamic, very quick turning, and in the past hasn't really engaged with the Department of Defense, but that's exactly what the Navy and the DoD wants, these small companies that move things very quickly. So that's the concept of how Polaris is engaged with this really small community here in Rhode Island, and bringing that small community in to be more active with the Navy and the Department of Defense. I did mention that Polaris is part of a national network, and part of the Tech Bridge, the Northeast Tech Bridge, is engaging the Northeast region. So there are MEP centers in every state. And we have reached out, and we're working on resources to be available in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, to all collaborate. So when a project comes out of the Navy and into 401 Tech Bridge, we've got the same feet on the street that I talked about here in Rhode Island is in those other states as well. So we have very personal, in-depth knowledge of the companies all in the Northeast, and we have the ability to pull again, these companies that would not have traditionally engaged with the Navy in to help solve problems quickly because it's really in their wheelhouse. So that's how, a little bit of background on Polaris, how we have evolved it into 401 Tech Bridge. And I think we've got a huge opportunity to go forward, both with Department of Defense and the small company growth.
So I have some questions that I want Christine to have a chance to talk, but I'm going to circle back, and I'm not sure who's going to want to answer this, but obviously we're curious about the COVID crisis and how it has impacted the small manufacturing companies in Rhode Island, and how this program will help with the recovery. That's one question. And then as the DoD addresses COVID, what kind of new opportunities do you anticipate to support their R&D needs? A couple other questions, but let's jump over to Christine Smith, the amazing Christine Smith, and you can talk about all that you do to support R&D and economic development initiatives. Can you?
Sure. Thanks, Tuni. Well, you know, it's I'm listening to our federal friends and our friends at Polaris and TechBridge, and so I mean, I just want to add that, you know, like our partners, we're at the state level are really deeply committed to the acceleration of technology development. And I know I have my colleagues here, Sue Lee, Cowan, and Pete Rumsey. I mean, we all work together, you know, trying to help companies and bring more technology, faster technology to the state. And we do this, we've been really fortunate. We've had a couple of legacy programs, the SBIR matching grants and some other grants through a large EPSCoR grant to the state. But we've also been fortunate in the last few years where we have a governor who's brought on a number of new programs. And these programs deliver grant funds directly to companies for product development, but they also support organizations. So for example, helping intermediaries to deliver technical assistance or other programs. I know we've worked in the defense, we've worked with SNIDIA, we've worked with the Composites Alliance. You know, we're an early funder of TechBridge, giving them some early dollars when they've been waiting for some of the larger funders to come forward. So we work in a number of different ways, and sometimes I find it just easier if I give you an example. So one of our newer programs is an innovation voucher program. It provides grants of up to $50,000 for companies to tap expertise they might need for product development. We've had a number of companies participate in this, and I know Chase is one of our more recent grantees. But an example of one that's completed the project is, again, it's a defense company. They were working on an inflatable panel that they were developing for one of the defense agencies. And they had all sorts of expertise in fluid dynamics and computation, but they didn't have a specific mechanical engineering expertise that they needed to advance the product and get over a hump. And so they did find that expertise at URI, and there's also a very specific testing facility. So they're able to access that. And the nice story here is not only did they get to further develop their product, but they really started a true collaboration with the university, with the faculty member, with his lab, with the grad students. They ended up, one of the students was hired into the company. And they also were just able to develop, you know, their things that they didn't even expect out of the project, you know, different testing analysis, and again, the speed that they were able to get this project done just because they were working so collaboratively. They could down select what they needed and move on. And sort of the nice ending to the story, as I said, is not only do they have a really strong working relationship with the university, they have a working relationship with the lab, they have a new product. They also were able to turn that into an additional SBIR. And then they were able to work with us and get funding going forward. So we build, not just, you know, coming in and say, well, here, we'll help you here, but, you know, you're on your own for the rest of your product development. We're able to support them with an SBIR matching grant. So as I said, we're deeply committed. We've been fortunate to have the funding, you know, sort of knock on wood, and we'll continue to get some funding. But we really, you know, want to be there for the companies. So, and I apologize, I have a call at 4:30, but so if you see me drop off, it's just for that. But I'm able to talk to anyone offline who wants more information.
We could go on for hours. This is there's so many. Why don't, because we only have a few minutes, maybe could one of you, I don't know if it should be Steve, give an example of Navy technology that has been adopted in the private sector? Who would be best to call out on that? I was thinking, Steve.
Yeah, well, I could answer that, or maybe Valerie, but you had the question about COVID. And with the people on this call, I just want to tell a little COVID story, because the type of thing that I think the TechBridge is bad, even though we're not going to be you know, focusing on COVID forever. But recently, when with the limited N95 mask production, Paul here had worked with a company up in New Hampshire that has some capabilities. They thought they could switch over to stop making masks, but they needed to have some money for R&D. So I was able to call up Whitney, and she connected me with O&R, and we got a little bit of seed funding from there. Between Paul and I, we were able to contact the Army to get some funding. And they did initial research that they have a way to make masks now with materials that are easily sourced. And they were able to get the technology using that initial funding up to about 93% filtration. Then they did some internal R&D, and just today I heard we're able to get up to N95. So now we're connecting them to NUWC, and then the next step is working with Christian and the MEP network to say, now can we take that process and have other companies in the region start making masks that way. So with all these connections between the Army, the Navy, so the Army is going to do some additional testing for them, and people like Polaris to go to scale, our region may become the next, the go-to place for onshore making of N95 masks. So it's just a story of connections, and a lot of people on this call were involved with that.
Yeah, there's so many of you that are here that aren't on this panel that I could call out, like Pete Rumsey and the Respirator Project. Christian, do you want to give any examples or talk to what I asked before I switched over to Christine?
About technology that's moved up?
About how COVID crisis impacted small manufacturing companies here in Rhode Island, and how this program will help with the recovery, or do you have any examples of that?
So, I mean, this COVID crisis has impacted manufacturing companies in all different ways, and it's been interesting. It's impacted some of them very positively from a business point of view, I should say, where their business has been up dramatically. But we have had companies that have pivoted their business into PPE or other type of products. It's a hard transition to make, right? So if you're a small company and you're making some fabric-based thing and decide that you want to help the community and start making masks, it's sounds like an easy pivot. It's hard and often costly. So the program that Steve just talked about, being able to provide technology, baseline technology, and married up with Christine's programs and the innovation vouchers to provide expertise in terms of implementing it. Those are the types of implementations that will help companies really pivot the right way instead of dumping money into and potentially losing that money, down the long term. So there is a bit of danger with some companies that have made a hard pivot, that the virus changes in certain ways and guidance changes in certain ways to make those new products need to be changed or tweaked more. But I think the assistance of 401 Tech Bridge, I think the Navy's support of these companies is critical. And the state is already doing stuff with Christine's programs in terms of figuring out how to help those small companies make different products, pivot their business in new and different ways, like Sully's programs in terms of, how do you now sell those products, those masks, instead of selling them through a distribution channel, sell them to more of a B2C model. So there are lots of different parts and pieces. I really see TechBridge as one of the key components of giving new technology for new products and new markets out there.
And the only thing I would add, Tuni, is I agree with Christian. It's, sometimes you have to change or you have to pivot just because of the reality of the situation if your market's gone. But what I've seen, and I've really just been just amazed at, is more of the dual application of, so I had one recent voucher where there was a company that does breathing apparatus for divers, and he realized that was a respiratory application for healthcare workers, and even for prevent, to help people before they go on a ventilator, to use this diving with, the divers use as a rebreather. So I think it's more of that, just sort of what I've seen on the innovation scale is really understanding different uses and different applications for the technology, which can also be key.
That's an awesome example. I'm glad you brought that one up. Whitney, did you have something to add before we pivot to the next session?
Yes, please. Yeah, I was just going to add, so most of the time I don't think there's a benefit to having extra oversight and some national level, meddling in your affairs. But I think we've seen a lot of good coming out of the COVID as well from our point of view, in terms of helping us understand how we can respond quicker. So for example, we were able to get funding to Christian pretty quickly to help support some of the efforts locally here, and to Steve, separate things just for the PPE, and also connecting Keyport, so NUWC Keyport, or the Undersea Warfare Center in Washington State, with the Northeast Tech Bridge, and kind of showcase that there were some ways to add value to each other and share best practices and test things that were coming out of New England over in Washington. So there's been a lot of benefits from collaborating. And then also you were asking about small businesses getting support. One of our other efforts has been identifying ways to increase private capital going into industry as well, and making our contracting mechanisms more attractive to small businesses, and kind of incite more kind of seed things that will be dual use kind of game changers for people in the private sector as well. So we never would have learned how to do some of that, and that we needed to get funding out extra quickly and actually push phase 2 SBIRs to go out faster. We were able to get more funding out during COVID. We kind of upped our timeline to get some funding out, and we really wouldn't have known how to do that or that it was necessary if we didn't start talking with all of you guys.
Thank you all for all that you do. This ecosystem is unbelievable. We really should have opened this up with a drawing of this ecosystem, because it's been so impressive to watch it be developed over the last 6-7 years or longer, depending on how you look at it.